Welcome back. Well, the race to replace Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell intensifies. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is leading a search, which includes some familiar names like Kevin Hassett and Kevin Warsh, who I believe are the leading candidates. But the list is long, and it now includes former St. Louis Federal Reserve President James Bullard, who Scott Bessent said is on the list. Joining me now is the man himself, Purdue University Mitch Daniels School of Business Dean and former St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank President James Bullard. James, great to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Have you spoken to Scott Bessent about potentially getting the job of the chairman of the Fed?
I have spoken with the Treasury Secretary, and we've been in contact to try to set up an interview after Labor Day, probably. It hasn't been set yet.
What's your assessment of the Fed's policy right now, sir? I mean, it's amazing to me, I mentioned this earlier, that it feels like the European Central Bank is the one that world central banks are following. It used to be the Fed would set the tone and everybody else would follow. But the Fed and the European Central Bank have completely different policies right now. How would you assess the situation?
I think the European economy is in more trouble than we are. We have a growth agenda associated with the new administration, and so I think we've got more room to maneuver probably than the Europeans do. They've got a war on the European continent, which are trying to bring to an end, but they've got other problems, I would say, relative to us.
So what would you be doing right now at the Fed? What do you believe is the proper policy today?
I've said that I think we can. I think rates are a little bit high right now, and I think we can get down about 100 basis points going into 2026. I think that'll start with a rate reduction here at the September meeting and probably be followed up later this year. But you can go further in 2026, depending on how the data come in. You do want to keep inflation low and stable, and you do want to protect the reserve currency status of the dollar.
Well, I mean, the president has been pressuring the Fed to lower interest rates, partly because of the cost of holding the debt that we have, $37 trillion in debt that America faces right now. And the money that we spend on the interest on that debt is more than we're actually spending on defense spending. And so that's why the president has been partly the reason that the president has been calling Jay Powell too late. What's your thinking here in terms of the Fed considering the cost of debt? I know that the Fed has its very specific mandate, keeping inflation low and of course, employment high. But should the consideration of the debt, and I know that's Congress, they're spending too much money, but should the consideration of the cost of debt be part of the thinking around that mandate?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a spending problem. Congress spends too much money, and even if you could snap your fingers and have lower rates, Congress would just sweep in and spend all that money. So I think you've got to get that under control if that's what you're concerned about. I think with rates, you have to be very careful. You'll get too much inflation if you start going down this kind of route.
So if you cut rates too much, you spike inflation. We go back to where we were in the previous 4 years.
You get kind of a miserable outcome. You still have too much spending, and you have inflation, and it probably feeds into growth as well.
Well, look, the Jackson Hole Symposium kicks off today, as you know, and of course, Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell will be delivering his keynote speech tomorrow. That will be his final Jackson Hole speech before his term ends in May. What are you expecting that speech to be? Typically, you've seen this speech focus on the challenges of making policy in an uncertain world. Will he discuss fiscal consolidation? Will he discuss deficits and debt? Because, the Lindsay Group writes an interesting piece. They say the first quarter of 2025 saw a deficit of $596 billion, and the second quarter of 2025 saw a deficit of just $30 billion. So even if one adds the large July deficit to the second quarter number, the total is still only $321 billion. That's a $400 billion shrinkage of the deficit, 1.3% of GDP in just 6 months. Is he going to talk about that?
I don't think he's going to talk about it. I think he's going to talk. He's going to talk about the Fed outlook, which and try to set up the September meeting, I think, and the outlook for the rest of the year. I think he's going to probably talk about longer run issues associated with the framework review. I think the committee is probably going to moderate its framework that was adopted in 2020. And they're going to step back from some of the items that were in that. So I think that's probably the outline for the talk, although you can get surprised on these things. We'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, what's your take on this whole conversation about the independence of the Federal Reserve? Because, I know that that's one place that Fed talkers like to go. The Fed has to be independent. But am I wrong to say that wasn't it Jay Powell who violated the independence of the Federal Reserve when he started bringing in all of these other things? I mean, why the focus on climate change policies? Why the focus on DEI policies? And of course, why cut interest rates 2 months before a presidential election and then after the election say, oh, never mind, I was kidding. I'm not going to cut rates further. Now that I know who won the election, I'm going to focus more on inflation. I mean, independence goes two ways, right?
Absolutely. And I don't I've stepped back. I think we've talked about it before, but I've stepped back from the idea of calling it independence. It's really arm's length from day-to-day politics. And obviously, these are political appointees on the Board of Governors. So certainly you have a political component. There's testimony before the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. Politicians comment all the time on where monetary policy should be. So there is a political component, but it's designed to be insulated from the day-to-day fray inside Washington, because otherwise you get too much volatility coming from that channel, and then you don't want that to translate into actual financial pricing every day, because then you get a risk premium in all your rates, and we all have to pay higher interest rates all the time. So you're trying to get rid of that by smoothing that out and having a smoother process for deciding interest rates that change. It does change over time, but it changes slowly over time.
Yeah, great point. You're right on that analysis. I agree. Look, the July Fed minutes this week showed broad support for holding rates steady last month, despite Christopher Waller and Mickey Bowman's dissent. Most officials weighing inflation risks against employment concerns, while others signaling they would support a cut at this month's meeting. James, what did you make of the minutes, how there was broad support, and are you expecting the Fed to cut in September?
I do think they'll cut in September. I think these minutes were a little stale because you didn't have that crucial labor report when the meeting occurred. And I think that would have changed some of the views a little bit because jobs were marked down quite a bit. So it would have been nice if we would have got that part of the analysis. People have commented since then. You still have a very low unemployment rate. I would say overall, I'm still pretty bullish on the outlook for the U.S. economy. I think the deregulation agenda and the growth agenda will take hold. But I think the world is adjusting to a new tariff policy. It takes a while to adjust, and all these countries have to decide what they're going to do with the new tariff policy. That's fine. But once we get through that adjustment process and move forward, I think we'll have plenty of growth in the U.S.
That's terrific, because that's the priority of this administration, growth. And look, already this administration has taken in, $100+ billion in revenue from these tariffs. I guess we are slowly but surely getting clarity on these policies, James.
Yeah, I appreciated that we got to deal with the EU. That's one of the biggest blocks. We'll see on Canada and Mexico. I guess we're going to, revisit the USMCA, and then you still got China sitting out there, but for now it's on the back burner. So I think we've made a lot of progress on the trade front. We got many other countries out there, but they're smaller trading partners relative to those four.
James, it's great to get your take on all of that. Thanks so much.
All right, great to be on.
All right,
Thanks.
good to see you.